Welcome to the Created Mind podcast, where we discuss psychology and its influence on culture from a Christian perspective. My name is Ashley Hagman. I am a therapist and adjunct professor of psychology, and I'm excited for our guest today. We have Sheila Chunis. She is a counselor, and she has been in the field for a long time, and she is here today to share with us her wisdom and her experience and how the field has changed and how it has impacted culture and how things have developed over her career and the types of things that she's noticed. So, Sheila, welcome. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself, about your practice, any niches or specialties?
Well, I guess I'll start off by saying I've been married 50 years. And so I have three grown children, they're all doing well, and I have two grandchildren. And I like to knit and read and do exercise. And I also like to follow true crime cases.
Oh,
So as for niches, I can really name two of them, I guess, would be for some reason I got very interested in doing public speaking.
interesting.
Yeah, and so my first one was actually like respond to the domestic violence call for emergency responders because that can be a very dangerous attempt. And then the second one I got really interested in was about boys and
Hmm.
how we socialize boys in our culture. And this was actually back in the late 90s. And so the attention at that point really, if you can recall, that was the emerging girls are in trouble and we need to get them into math and sciences and that
Mm.
kind of thing. So it was a really hard sell doing a presentation. And there were a number of psychiatrists that had written books at Harvard. And I used to go to seminars there and
Yeah.
put together this presentation. And I did show it to some parents and some school administrators, but that was my toughest one. So then after Katrina,
Hmm.
I moved on to doing a presentation on compassion fatigue because that was beginning to differentiate out from job burnout, that the
Yeah.
healthcare professions really had this compassion fatigue. So I did that for state managers and social workers and then the last one that I did was it was counseling the military, and I presented that at the state counseling conference that, 1 year. And that was because our governor actually created a military support program, and there were a number of us as counselors that were selected to provide counseling to the military, and we were trained by VA and Yale University. So
Wow.
any member of even a military family could get free counseling in our state.
Wow. That's so needed. That's so
It
important.
was, yeah.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do was be able to give that presentation to the state counselors. So even if they weren't in this program and they should have somebody military related, that they would have some skills.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
beautiful. I love your topics because I feel like, and especially the times that you were talking with them, I feel like you were sounding the call on a lot of things that we're seeing the fruition of now. So the boys are in trouble. I think we're seeing that a lot now. You were
Yeah.
seeing it way back when, and now it's like really, I think, obvious to most people. And then compassion fatigue. Just recently, I've been, especially after COVID, seeing that a lot with family members and friends who are nurses who are just going through. I mean, they described to me what they're going through every day between both patients and the bureaucracy in hospitals and what's expected of them. And it's hard. And I know some people who are leaving the profession early. They're still very young because of those issues. And then, yeah, obviously, military families such an important niche. Absolutely.
And one thing about the compassion fatigue is the pressure, like when you're talking about the nursing, and then they also have families and they have other outside obligations. And so, and how do you manage all those so that you don't trip offline? And that's when, you come to
Yeah.
the point where you just have to leave the profession entirely. And
Yeah.
I would say after COVID, though, that was an unmanageable situation, so that I could see why people would be leaving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then too, I've seen a lot of there's guilt both ways, right? There's guilt of if you take time off of work to focus on your family, you're not being replaced really in the hospital. And so you're leaving all of your coworkers in the lurch and they're really struggling. So you feel guilt to take time that's owed you. But then if you are working what's quote expected of you, what they press you to work in the hospital, then you're not home with your family and prioritizing what's most important. So it's really kind of a no-win situation, let alone, all the other issues of life that you have to face. Yeah, that's a hard
You,
place to be.
you just did the whole presentation.
Oh, there you go.
That was well
We'll
done.
team up. We'll do it together next time. Well, can you tell me a little bit? So that was a little bit of your history, but go more in detail about what is your career journey? How did you get to be where you are today? And how did God bring you to this place?
Well, it was a roundabout way. I actually went to school in Boston at Northeastern University. I graduated in 1974, and I had a degree in recreation education. So when I moved shortly after that, I moved to Connecticut and I got a job in a nearby town. And I was a recreation supervisor for a number of years. And I created programs and hired staff and that kind of thing. And then I got a little tired of it, but I was starting a family at that time. So, it was a good break to
Yeah.
leave and, and then I started looking around at other things to do and I thought I would sell real estate. So I had a pretty good run for 5 years, and then the market collapsed. It was a big
Mm.
collapse in 1987. And so at that time, I scrambled around looking for work, and I found a job. I actually was hired by the state to do Social Security disability claims.
Interesting.
But one of the requirements was that we get our master's in counseling in 3 years. And at that time, the programs mostly were 3-year programs.
Okay.
And so then I had my degree fully subsidized. And then I stayed as an examiner for 29 years. But around 2004, there was a Christian agency in the next town, and I worked part-time 2 nights a week for about 5 years. And
Oh,
then
awesome.
I decided I'd open up my own practice, and I did that here in my local town. And
Way to go.
I was there for 15 years, and then COVID hit.
Mm.
So like everybody else, I had to set up a home office and do telehealth.
Ooh,
But since at my age, I thought I didn't really want to take the challenge of setting up another office, and so I just do telehealth right
yeah,
here. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's similar. The COVID experience is what happened for me. I was working in another agency, which I loved. It was such a great place to work with. My coworkers were incredible. But during COVID, we had to go online. And I realized if I'm just doing, and I had my daughter just a few months before that. So I was really working part-time anyways. So I was like, why not it's so easy now to open your own practice. Back when you did it at first, it was a lot more difficult than it is now.
Yeah, that's
But
true.
it's so easy to open a telehealth practice that I was like, why not do this for myself and make more money? So I struck out on my own and it's been great. A lot of flexibility, which has been good with a family.
I think that's nice, especially like when you have a small family and then you can manage around it. You don't have to worry about daycare
Yeah,
and the
exactly.
other thing is COVID has trained people to be comfortable at home.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
many people would rather do telehealth. They say it to me, they'd rather
Hmm.
they'll just sit with their phone and
Yeah,
have a session. So they're very happy to do it from home, and we are too.
yeah, yeah. It's so interesting how God works those things where before COVID, I never would have considered I had thought about it and I was like, no, that seems like a terrible way to do therapy. And there is something about being in person with people. I had a client where I saw them via telehealth and then we switched to in person for a little bit and the sessions were more rich at that time in a way that's different than online. However, there is a sense in which, like you said, there's a comfortability, especially when you're first beginning therapy, where you're in your own context, you're at home, you're familiar with talking to people online. And so it's a little bit easier to begin therapy doing it online. And yeah, there's some, and then it's accessibility as well. People who wouldn't normally be able to make it to therapy because of their mental health issues or because of transportation or just their schedule. So there's, pros and cons to it. And I think it's a beautiful thing how God has provided this avenue where we've got both now that we can facilitate and use the strengths, where they're needed. So
I
it's
actually agree with
exciting.
you 100% on that because I think that, well, because I'm older than some of the clinicians your age,
Yeah.
that I actually thought that being face to face was really critical, because you can observe the client and all that was taught to us. But then afterwards, all the reasons that you just mentioned have
Hmm.
convinced me that telehealth is really an excellent medium.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I've had multiple clients that I do not think would ever have gone to therapy if it weren't for online therapy.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I
Especially
think,
younger ones.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And right now, Medicare has a big, big push to get the elderly online this way, doing virtual visits.
Yeah. I haven't, just recently in Michigan, counselors are able to take Medicare. So I haven't looked into that much. I haven't had experience, and that's not my population niche, so I'm not up on that. But that's really encouraging. That's good because a lot of elderly, they are homebound. They can't, and they have so many other health appointments as well. It's hard to fit another one weekly into their schedule. So that is a really
Yeah,
great,
that's true.
great thing for
Actually,
them.
last night I went to a program with a speaker who was talking about loneliness, and
Mm.
when she talked about loneliness among aged people, the effects on the brain, and also shortening lifespan. So that's one of the reasons why I think that Medicare is heavily focused on that population.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've seen some statistics on how being connected with others extends life expectancy by a huge margin.
Yeah, it
It's
was
really
15 years, she
interesting.
said. I thought that was astounding.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I think I saw something about that. I don't know if they've proven it or if it's just correlated, but the reason why women tend to outlive men, one of the reasons, there's many, is that they tend to be more integrated with grandchildren and they tend to be more socially connected than men. So a lot of,
Grandmothers,
yeah,
yeah, I could see that.
yeah. So a lot of men are tend to be more reclusive, especially if their spouse passes first. It's really
Well, it's
harder for them.
funny because my PCP used to send men over to me. Like most of them had retired and they couldn't adapt to the lifestyle. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
he would say to me like, "Now you take care of this guy. You know how to handle him."
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such a gift and that's really good. My husband is a financial planner and he works a lot with people usually that are approaching retirement but then sees them through retirement and that's a huge life crisis that you're coming to where you have gotten so much meaning from your work and a lot of your identity is wrapped up in your work as well. And then it seems great to be retired, right? You have time to do everything that you want, but there's more to life than just doing what you want. You need to have a purpose and a meaning and
Right.
it's hard
Well, I
adaption
met a
there.
doctor that was 78 and he thought that he would work until forever.
Mm.
I guess he has some health issues now that have sidelined him. And he told me that the secret to his retirement is that he joins everything.
Oh, that's good.
It is, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Yeah. That's uncomfortable though, because you're put at, 70 or whatever, you're putting yourself out there and trying new things that you've never done before. That's a really
Yeah.
hard thing to do, but it's so good. That's the difference between, yeah, that like growth mindset of challenging yourself and
Yeah.
thriving in life and letting fear dictate your life and suffering from
Exactly.
it. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
absolutely.
So maybe
So
that's what I'll have to do is start joining everything.
there you go. That's
Yeah.
right. You know what you got to do. Let's just doing it. So take me back to your counselor education. What were some of the main topics covered in your program when you went through it, which was you said, oh, and
I,
also give a little bit of the timeline there.
actually, I started in 1990
Okay.
and really the hot,
That's when I was born.
and I couldn't, I have every child's report card back to the first grade, but I couldn't find my college transcript. So I
That's
don't
such a
really,
mom. That's such a mom. That's a
not really.
beautiful mom story. Yeah.
Can you imagine when I present them to them? They're going right in the rubbish. But
But that's your
anyway,
achievement. That's something you're proud of. That's partly
yeah.
like
I'm
your
proud of them.
it's your story and their story.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
So, but I can't really remember. I mean, we did the group therapy. We did huge at that time was CBT, cognitive
Okay.
behavioral therapy,
Yeah.
and my professor was just in love with it. And so we had a lot of that, but I can't really remember. with specific modalities we were taught. But there was something about the 90s that I thought that I wanted to share was
Yeah.
that was the decade that they originated K-CREP, which standardized all the curriculums so that,
Yes.
I mean, they doubled the caseload. I think it's a 64 credit master's, I think now, but all the universities across the country were teaching the same thing. And so then after that came National Board for Certified Counselors, where we could take a test and present documentation, and then you'd be a certified counselor. And so that kind of knocked out some people that were hanging shingles that really weren't,
Interesting.
had no relationship to counseling. And then the third thing was in 1999, the state of Connecticut licensed counselors. And we, again, we had to present a lot of documentation. But that's when I felt that's when counseling really evolved into a helping profession that was being
Hmm.
recognized. Yeah, so it's probably around about 2000, right at the beginning of this decade, this century, that we really began to gain favor.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
So before that time, before K-CREP, you're saying there was a lot of people who were in the profession, but perhaps didn't have the training to be as effective or
True, or you may find, like, I know at my time, it was like the secretary to the human services. You could go in and talk with her or something. And there were people that didn't even have any advanced degrees that would just hang
okay.
out a shingle and be a counselor.
Interesting. Yeah. So it was less regulated, so anyone could say,
Yeah,
hey, I can provide therapy. Then they put the education requirements in place and were licensed it and were able to be taken more seriously as a field and things
definitely.
developed.
Yeah,
Yeah. Did they, when did insurances start reimbursing for counselors in your state? Or has that been something since the beginning of your career? Or is that something that came along later?
it So I always remember insurance being present. When I started at
Okay.
that Christian agency, we had a secretary that did all the credentialing with the different insurance companies, and she did the billing. And then at that time, it was just you file the bill, you get paid.
Okay.
And then I would say probably about 10 years later, they started working on this, model, like how,
Hmm.
having treatment plans with SMART goals that you had to include certain things in, medical necessity. You had to justify why this session was necessary. And then they began to audit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's what
That's a
everybody,
fun thing.
oh, really, we all live in fear of those audits.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Do you feel that the increased insurance regulations changed what was happening in the room in therapy at all for you or for the field?
Definitely. I think two ways was that in the beginning, in the 2000s, our treatment plan would just be client will do this, check in 3 months. And it was very simple.
Mm,
But now, you have the SMART goals, and then you have to tie your goals into your session. Like, what goal did you work on in the session? How did the client respond to that goal or the treatment? It's so the whole time, I think that we're very focused on carving out the session so that it meets the criteria of and in sessions that
yeah.
they can flow in very many different directions,
Yes.
and people are struggling with something at a time that they want to talk about that maybe is outside the goals. And so yeah, I do think that we are very goal driven in our sessions.
Yeah.
Do you find that?
Do you feel like that's inhibited some of the progress that you were hoping to make with people, or it's made the process less relational, or what specific downsides do you see to that sort of more goal driven way of doing counseling?
What I see is that people come in, so if you see them weekly and week to week, the situations are in flux. And
Mm,
so maybe
hmm.
this situation doesn't really fit into a goal. And so then, you're off trying to help the client with some challenge that they have. But is it medically necessary? What goal would it meet? Now do I change the
Yeah.
diagnosis? That kind of, there's
Yeah.
always it's spinning in your
Yeah.
head. Yeah. What do you find
Yeah.
any of that?
Yeah. Well, part of it is, I think for me, I, with my documentation, it's kind of tying in what you need to say for the insurance with
Yeah,
what's going on in the session. So I mean, it's client focused. So we need to focus on what the client needs
right.
in that session at that time. We're trained clinicians. If we're being theory driven, if we are being data driven, then we're doing our jobs. And I think
Mm.
that's my focus and that's what I want to do. And so in my documentation, I just try to do my best to tie back the goals and the treatment plan, but the direction of the session is what needs to happen. So
Yeah,
maybe we go a little bit, we spend 5 or 10 minutes going over what the man says we have to do, I guess,
yeah,
or what the official treatment plan is so we can say that we did it. But we need to focus on what the client needs in that session and have the flexibility. So I
exactly.
think that's what I try to do is to do the minimum I need to do to do the documentation honestly, but ultimately I'm there to heal people. Yeah, and so that's what it's a hard balance. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I guess like that sounds about like consistent with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And the medical model for mental health I have mixed feelings about it because I think it gives language to it, which helps people feel understood, helps people feel validated, and then helps us as clinicians to be able to talk on the same page as each other. So the description is important, but mental health isn't the same as physical health. Like you can't have this cut and dry test for something, and healing doesn't look the same. And so I think I have mixed feelings about the medical model for therapy. And also, I don't think that there's a lot of room. I think there needs to be more room for preventative mental health
Oh,
counseling
definitely.
because right now you have to have something really wrong with you to go to counseling, get your insurance to pay for it. And knowing very few people could afford to pay out of pocket for therapy before things escalate. And so now you're stuck dealing with when things have really gotten out of hand, when we could have talked about this and built the skills before you even had to go through this really difficult period in your life. So
That's a good point
that's
because
my
you're
spiel.
right. We often see the client when they're in crisis.
Hmm.
And so now we go into, we have to go into using minimizing the crisis, I guess. Whereas much of, or some of the theories that are skill-based would be appropriate prior to the crisis and may have
Yeah.
prevented it. But I think a lot of people don't really a lot of people don't see counseling as being educational. Like, for instance,
Yes.
I can't name the number of times people sat in the chair and said, "Oh, I never thought I would be here."
Yeah.
It, yeah, there's sort
Absolutely.
of a stigma to it,
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think is becoming increasingly less present.
right?
And I think in some cases, even a little to the extreme where people are proud of their mental illness
Yeah,
in an unhealthy way and they identify their identity is wrapped up in their mental illness. And I think that's not healthy. So it's kind of, again, it's like this mixed bag of like, yay, counseling is more available, it's more accepted, but we also need to keep that in a realm of what's healthy and appropriate. Yeah. So what's
yeah.
your theoretical orientation? How do you practice
Oh, as I said before, I basically use CBT,
CBT?
cognitive
Okay.
behavioral, and then I'll mix
Yeah.
in some motivational or
Mm.
solution focused DBT. I think we all draw from,
Yes.
different at different times.
Hmm.
And I actually have like another little niche that
Yeah.
I kind of insert into my therapy is what's called lifestyle counseling.
Mm.
And I went to Harvard about 6 or 7 years ago, and they had a whole program on diet, exercise, stress reduction, and sleep. And so I actually try to incorporate those into my treatment goals because I see sleep being restorative as being
Yes.
very therapeutic. And then
Yes.
the exercise is extremely healthy in terms of, um, the increased serotonin. And then as far as diet goes, you probably read a lot now about the gut and keeping the gut
Mm.
healthy.
Hmm.
Serotonin actually comes from the gut, not from the brain.
Yeah.
So that's something new that has come out. So if we
Yeah.
keep a healthy gut, it'll wash the brain with serotonin, and perhaps you wouldn't have a need for, like, say, an antidepressant.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
all of those things combined, having a healthy lifestyle, that's something that I work in with everything else.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And that's something that I would like to add more in my practice. I've been thinking about that actually the past year or so of how practically to do that because I read a study that they they compared exercise and mood drugs and they found that exercise actually had better outcomes than most mental health medications. So
Yeah,
that blew my mind, absolutely. And then like you were saying about the neurotransmitters being located, especially serotonin in your gut and all of that. And then also my own experience with sleep. I went through a period with my son where he just had a lot of sleep issues. So obviously I wasn't sleeping. And I was able to see how deeply that affected my mood. And
yeah,
when I was able to get just the sleep that I need, like all of a sudden my mental health was so much better and really the problem was sleep. And so that all of that really resonates with me and is something, yeah, I want to also put more in my practice. I think it's sad how I think in the modern education system we're so siloed, we're so vertical in the way that we study our different professions. So when you're in counseling, you study counseling and you're not as keyed into neighboring disciplines.
yes.
But I think the integration of all of that is really what's helpful for people, and we should do more of that. Absolutely.
Well, I remember when I went to this program and there were a number of physicians, and when they brought up the topic of counseling on weight loss,
Hmm.
and there was a pretty strong reaction. They felt that they didn't have the time, that they weren't trained.
Yeah.
And then, I said to the doctor next to me, like, we are trained.
Mm.
Doctors might look at referring to a mental health person who's going to have the skills to be able to have that conversation
Yeah.
where the client doesn't get upset or reactive.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I can't tell you the amount of times where part of this is weight is a very sensitive topic for people, completely understandably. It's tied into a lot of self-image and the way that we view ourselves. And so it's very defensive when your doctor, who you don't have a strong relationship, you see them once a year and they say, hey, you need to lose, they look at a number on the scale and they say, hey, you need to lose weight. And the doctor, their primary job is to be a doctor and not necessarily a counselor. So maybe they're not even approaching it in the best way. And even if they are, that's hard to hear. And so you're not going to receive that in the same way. And it's less helpful to be like, hey, you need to do this. Most people know they need to lose weight, but it's the how do I do that? And how do I even feel that I can? And that's what counseling is equipped to work
Exactly.
people through. Yeah,
Yeah, that's very true.
that's really interesting. So, what changes have you seen in how new therapists, for example, are coming out of school versus how you practice? Like, how has the field in the way that they approach counseling, how has it changed, I guess, over time?
I actually have. I hope I'm on the right track, but some of
Yeah.
the things that I've seen about the young therapists coming out of school, having had expanded curriculums where they have more coursework under the belt, that
Okay.
they're using, more theoretical approaches, but they're very comfortable, like swaying in and out of, different
Hmm.
approaches. So they appear to be more confident in their work. And because of this, they have like an expanded toolbox, I think, which gives them the confidence that I see. I think the other thing is they're more innovative. They're very comfortable with technology and social media. They have very, very interactive websites. I think they're more cohesive as a group. I see them reaching out to one
Interesting.
another when they have questions about issues, or they reach out and they actually exchange clients because you're seeing more specialties,
Yes.
like, say, LGBTQT, or uh, maybe it might be postpartum depression.
Yeah.
So you'll see people actually sending a client that they're not going to do it themselves because they know somebody else has a specialty. So they're reaching out to one another more, I think. And another thing is that for so long there was a stigma attached to therapy. And that was something I think that during my time period was that we were working against that stigma. The
Mm,
younger people seem to have more confidence because I don't think they feel
yeah.
or have lived through or felt that stigma about mental health. It's really come out into the 21st century.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I would.
another thing I
Oh, go
think
ahead.
is that they view themselves as part of healthcare. Like we saw ourselves
Mm,
as a separate entity, but I think they see themselves in the realm of healthcare. Just my thought.
yeah. That's so interesting. I think those are all things that I agree with, but I've never thought about before, is my experience with my colleagues and the way that, and then also the stigma as well. Like I think early in my career, I grew up in a very conservative milieu, and there were people who were very vocal against therapy. And I can understand where they're coming from because there is a lot in psychology that if you don't understand, there's a lot in psychology that is anti-biblical.
Yes,
And if you don't understand how to sort through that, and that there is good things in psychology, and that God does reveal himself through the study of the human mind and behavior, it's scary. So I can understand where they're coming from. But yeah, so I do remember, especially when I went to college, I had a few people that kind of bristled a little bit. Nobody that was really pushing me though. So I never really felt that I had to fight back against a lot of stigma or my clients having stigma to come to counseling, apart from the self stigma of, not necessarily stigma, but the being able to admit that I need help. That's kind of the biggest hurdle that I think that in that realm that I've worked with my clients on. So yeah, I've never really felt that, but I know a lot of people talked about that. So I think I'm seeing that difference. And then also with the different niches and specialties coming about, that is one that I have seen more, because when I went through school, that was starting to be a thing where it's like you specialized in like addictions, or you specialized in children or teens or marriage or different things like that. And now we're seeing it even more specialized, I think, into specific disorders or very specific types of populations. And I think that's a good thing, because we have more therapists now that can handle that, and more people that are seeking therapy. So you can kind of differentiate. And then because of that, I don't ever feel in competition with other therapists, because we're all so different and there's enough clients to go around. So
there
it's,
certainly is. Yes.
yeah, which is a sad reality. Man, being a therapist is always intention, because you develop this relationship with someone and you hope that when they leave you that you never see them again for their good.
Yeah.
But then also sometimes you're like, oh man, that was a really good, great client. I enjoyed working with them, but I hope for their sake I never see them again.
I know. Yeah.
So
I know
there's
it's
that.
way, several times.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then also the eclectic nature of the way that we practice. Yeah, like you said, I would have a hard time nailing down, this is my theory that I operate from. I talk about a few different theories that I like to use, but like you said, week to week, I use techniques from different areas, but I think I have a few things that are my go-tos,
Go to, yeah.
yeah, and my like more guiding principles of the way to consider sort of the big picture theoretical view of the human and of change and the nature of problems, things like that. But yeah, as far as like the techniques day to day, it's very much a toolbox of, let's do some DBT here, let's do some MI here, let's do some
Yep.
CBT. Yeah, absolutely. And all those you named are very good and very evidence based. So yeah. But I know from reading through history and then watching some shows, like for example, I don't know if you've ever seen Frasier.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and how the therapist, it used to be you were a Jungian or you were a Freudian, like you were a devotee of that, and you had to just do that, and that's the way that informed your entire practice. That's very different than the way that we practice nowadays.
Well, one of the things that was popular, but mostly with psychiatrists, but there was free association.
Mm,
And
yeah,
with free association, you'd enter the office and you'd sit down, and the psychiatrist would just be sitting there.
yeah,
And then you'd say, "Well, what am I supposed to do?" Well, this is your session. Talk about what you want. And so this free, free flowing conversation that you're creating is not getting any feedback or any instructions
Yeah.
really, then after your session, you just get up and you leave.
Yeah.
So it would leave people wondering, like, well, what was the value of that hour
Yeah.
sitting there? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the difference between how things have shifted with the role of the clinician. So it
Mhm.
used to be like in Freudian therapy, the client is laying on a couch. It's the
Yeah.
classic when you think of it, like facing away. The clinician is really not an entity in themselves in this session. They're just kind of this objective sounding board, I guess.
Yes.
They're not an active part of the session.
Right.
And then when, like Carl Rogers, for example, the more humanistic perspectives came in, the therapist took a more active role in therapy. And then they were finding that it's actually the therapeutic relationship that's the strongest force for
Yes.
change, which I think is really beautiful, which makes sense with the way God made us to be relational and to need each other. And we are social creatures.
Yeah. And like for me, I expect within a session that I'm going to move this client to a higher level of functioning
Yeah.
before they walk out the door. And going back to the client, what's my responsibility to the client is really to, help them to function more efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely. You're providing that scaffolding. So especially with children, like children, the way that they learn is the adult provides this sort of support, the scaffolding, like you would think with a building that allows them to reach a higher level of development. And so that's your role as a counselor is not to build the bricks for them, but to
Yes.
provide the scaffolding for them to climb on so they can build the bricks themselves. But you are an active part of the process. You're providing a piece that's necessary to get them further in their healing and further in their development.
Yeah.
But they're the ones that have to do the work at the same time. So it's a really, yeah,
Yeah.
really interesting. Yeah, it's beautiful to see that too when the
Yes.
clients,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
like when I have those times. And I think there's a lot of like grounding and foundation work. I was just talking about this in the episode I just released. Was a lot of times in counseling, things are really slow in the beginning because you're trying to build that relationship and build the skills. And so for a long time, sometimes it can feel like you're making no progress. And then all of a sudden it like clicks for people and you see those moments of change. And it's like, that's what gets me through in the career, you know?
Yes.
That's what's really beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it really is the change-making process.
hmm
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what changes on the client side do you feel that you've seen over the years? Is there like different types of symptoms or symptom severity, response to treatment, demographics, anything there that you can think of that you're noticing?
I can think of a lot
Okay.
because I did a lot of thinking about over the past 24 years. I would say that today the clients we see present with greater severity of symptoms.
Hmm.
And I think that very often many of them present with relationship issues and
Hmm.
they have major struggle. It doesn't matter really what age they are, whether they be children, adolescents, or even late stage, aged population. And I think that what's happened is the use of social media has changed the way we communicate.
Hmm.
And so consequently, the I would say the shortened or the very brief interactions that people have create a lot of they create controversy. Like, well, what did you
Yes.
mean by this? And
Yeah.
the other thing is that they've corrupted that organic conversation that the people generally have, that give and take back and forth when you're face to face and you're sharing
Yeah.
ideas or trying to work out a problem or whatever. And so they've corrupted that process with these very brief statements, and then it
Hmm.
creates conflict. And so I think that the skill deficits are an issue that is a big problem. I think social media in itself, like I've had clients come in and say, "Oh, I learned this breathing technique on TikTok,"
Hmm.
or, TikTok that this lady said that if I did this, yada, yada, yada. And
Yeah.
so, and you see that more in the younger generation because they're the ones that take to those newer modalities that are coming out. Like, I think some of the ones where you can just text,
Yeah.
like a
Hmm.
clinician that you just text to. But to me, I
Yeah.
find that to be very dangerous, not
I
having
think
a
so too. And AI too. AI
and AI, that's
therapists.
another thing that people are using AI now for.
Yeah.
They're kind of getting there. I mean, I don't think AI is developed to the point where they have like really a huge knowledge base. So they're getting kind of simplified answers
Yeah.
from AI based on what AI is. probably been fed.
But it feels really real. I've been using Grok for like for example, I just asked about I'm potty training my son and it's a rough process. So I was like asking about that and it asks you questions and it says, oh, that's great that you're doing this. It feels very relational in a way and asks you follow-up questions in a way that a lot of humans don't do.
That's true.
And it feels really good. I'm not gonna lie. And that's what I think is a little bit dangerous is that it feels real, it
No,
feels good.
that's interesting you say that because yesterday I actually was using Copilot, which is Microsoft, and
Okay.
I was asking it some questions. And it was almost like I couldn't stop the conversation because they kept coming
Yeah.
back with comments about like it's very good that you're doing that, or you might want
Hmm.
to look into this. And so
Hmm.
they wanted to continue talking, and I was just like, no, I just wanted that one answer.
Yeah. 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 So social media, I really agree with you on that because I think there's a lot of skill and a lot of healing that's built with when you're in person, you can't just quit a conversation. But
Right.
so when you're in person with somebody and you have a disagreement, you have to see it through to the end. I mean, I guess you can walk away, but most people don't.
No.
And so there's some skill that's built in that. And actually, that's how relationships are built is by when you come up against a conflict, resolving it together and repairing. And that's how you actually grow closer
Closer, right.
and build together. And there's a lot of strength in relationships that happens in that when you have to make it work, you make it work. And that's really good. And social media, you can disengage with people and it's easy and you can just say, "Oh, well, I'm done
Yeah.
with this conversation," and you don't have to bear with them
Yeah.
in the
And I
situation.
do see like, in some of the different groups that people are in, like Facebook groups or Reddit groups or things like that, there's a lot of conflict. And I wonder if
Hmm.
they're acting out some anger maybe they had through the day in the workplace or relationship, or, where's this anger coming from and why do they care so much about this topic that they want to spew,
Hmm.
this huge paragraph.
Yeah.
Uh,
So you're
so,
seeing
and
it
then,
as an, oh, go ahead.
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
You're seeing it as an outlet for the things that they maybe couldn't say in their real life
Yeah.
because people don't want to hear it or, they can't sort of get that anger out. So they get it out in a catharsis online, but in a way that's sort of like a positive feedback cycle that's like perpetuating the anger instead of like helping them
Yes.
resolve it.
Yeah. And it's unilateral. So they're not going to be really getting much. I mean, somebody else might make a comment in return, but it's not like,
Right.
it's back to what we were saying, a two-person conversation where you're getting,
Yeah.
human feedback that is going to probably anger you more.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Mm.
I hadn't really thought about that aspect of it before. That's really
But the
interesting.
one that the Boston Globe is a newspaper up in Boston, of course. And one Sunday, they had an issue where on the front page, they had a colored picture of a middle-aged man sitting in the bleachers at the Boston Red Sox stadium. And it was titled The Loneliness of the Middle-Aged Man. And that
Hmm.
I see as the biggest cohort coming in is the about over 50 mil.
Interesting. Yeah. Talk more about that. Why do you see that and what kinds of, yeah,
Well,
tell me
I
more
think
about that.
that the over 50 male, there's a number of issues I think that they're being confronted with that are difficult. And one is in relationships. I think we know now that like 60% of divorces are precipitated by females, and that what they're actually, I think 2020 or somebody did a story on the fact that women over 50 prefer to be divorced. They don't want to be making dinners for somebody that they don't want their atmosphere polluted by bad moods, that they actually enjoy the company of females versus grumpy male that doesn't want to do
Hmm.
something. And so I think it was really during the past 20 years that, I began to see that phenomena taking place. And so it left a lot of men like very confused as to why this was happening in their life. And there wasn't, they didn't expect it. And then the second thing is that in the workplace, I think that a lot of men felt that 50 was the cutoff age, that they were then susceptible to job loss or
Oh,
job promotion or something like that. So they were getting hit on a number of different levels.
yeah. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And do you see, this is something that I've heard a lot. I don't deal with this population, so I'm not as familiar, but I've heard a lot of parents of that age, their children cutting off relationships with them.
Huge epidemic.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and then again, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that again speaks to how communication has been so changed and diluted that instead of being able to say to the parent that, I really had a problem with you, or I feel I'm struggling with this because you did this or something, and you give the parent the opportunity to respond.
Yeah.
Instead, they just cut it off. They
Mm.
don't want to engage in any type of dialogue.
Yeah, because it's really hard to, and we're none of us are perfect, and your parents might have some legitimate things that were really hard on you and that you can't
Sure.
deal with as an adult. And so, but there's a difference between creating boundaries with a parent and yet still bearing with them and still having that sort of longevity with them and still maintaining a relationship. And then, but it's
Right.
easier to just say, nope, nothing. And then you don't have to make those judgments and it's not as sticky, it's not as
Yes.
hard to sort through, and you don't experience as much negative emotions in trying to deal with that. It's easier to just cut them off.
Right.
Yeah. And so, yeah, absolutely.
Well, there's
Yeah.
another thing too that's going on in our culture is the lack of empathy. It's something that social
Mm,
researchers are doing a lot of studying about because of the
really?
fact that I guess empathy is necessary for the perpetuation of the species.
Yeah.
And a major concern is the lack of empathy that they're seeing in school-age children.
Interesting.
So I do think that maybe that this generation that are employing the cutoff technique, that their lack of empathy too is that they can't, because the pain in in the therapy room is palpable when you're talking to these
Yeah.
parents.
Yeah, I can't imagine with my own children, with all that I've been through with them and all that like my relationship, and then like not having a relationship with them in adulthood, I can't imagine
Right.
what that would feel like. Even if I really hurt my children, I can't, like, that would be really hard to work through. And especially coming to terms with if I hurt my children in some way that I'm realizing now as an adult, or they're coming to me with, or yeah, or their perception of it. If, yeah, that would be really hard. Yeah, that would hurt
Yeah.
a lot, I can
Yeah,
imagine.
I mean, I would hope that if mine had issues with me, and I can't say that they haven't brought up issues and we've
Yeah,
talked it out, but at the same time, like I'd like to think that I would be open to hearing it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I see a lot of people just, I guess there's a new book out by this woman, Mel Robbins, and it's called Let Them. So it's
Okay.
like if you have trouble with a friendship or something, just let them go. Or,
Mm,
if they don't want to talk to you, then just let them go. And it's like live your best life and just let
mm,
them. I wouldn't be able to live my best life if I
mm-mm.
just let them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And this is something that I come to over and over again in my practice, is that a lot of times the hardest and most uncomfortable things are the things that are going to be best for you in the long run.
Yes.
That the hard road is actually the road of where you have the most joy and the most fulfillment. And being comfortable and being, quote, happy
Mhm.
is not actually a good way to live your life. And it's
Right.
actually really empty. That's so interesting. I want to go back to what you said about the lack of empathy in school age children. That's something that's really new to me that I'm going to have to look into that more. I'm really curious. I mean, I have my guesses of why that might be, but I'm really curious to look into that more. That's really
Yeah,
fascinating
it's
to me.
frightening because the issue that I was looking at was elementary school children. And I
Hmm.
think it was like around fourth grade that they began to see the development of the negative behaviors towards one another in that
Especially
level.
when there's so much effort now in the school systems to do social emotional learning, where they're
Yeah,
trying to promote more empathy and kindness and like
kindness.
anti-bullying stuff, and then to see less empathy.
Yes, that's true.
That's interesting.
It
Yeah,
is.
that's really
Yeah.
interesting.
And
Yeah.
it's and I think it's sad.
Topic for a future podcast right there. Wow. Yeah, it is very sad.
That
It's
is a
really
good point.
consuming.
It is probably a topic all on its own.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
So we're running out of time here. This has
Okay.
been such a I could talk for much longer than this because this is a really good conversation. But so
Okay.
to kind of like conclude all this, maybe what are some, let me ask you two questions if you're okay with that. First of all, for any potential clients out there, people who might think about going into therapy, what advice would you give them, either finding a therapist or just like what advice would you give them for their own mental health? What would be your,
Oh, you're asking me about like contacting a therapist or how to find a therapist or something like
well,
that.
like what would you look for in a good therapist? What would you,
I guess, again, it's driven by managed care. First, I'd look for an in-network
yeah.
therapist, and I'd probably develop a list of maybe 3 or 4, and then I might call them and most likely leave a message saying
Hmm.
that looking for a therapist, and these are some of the things that are bothering me, and these are some of the goals I have. So be very specific, and
Hmm.
then and ask them if they could give 15 minutes of their time, and
Yes.
then talk a little bit about what your needs are and see what the responses are and maybe what
Hmm.
they describe, um, what they do in their practice and how they can help out. Second thing I would do is I would ask them about their cancellation policies.
Yes.
That's a big
That's a big
problem.
one. Yeah. Just the logistics there. But yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of clients don't know that they can ask for 15 minutes to get to know their counselor.
No,
Yeah. But that's really important because you don't want to get into counsel because once you make an appointment and you invest time, you don't want like A, it's not healthy to keep switching counselors.
that's
And
true.
B, you're wasting money and you're wasting your own time if you don't click with that person. So if you do a quick 15 minutes to see if you click with that person, like that's a huge part of therapy is the relationship like we
Oh,
talked about. So
definitely.
yeah,
Yeah,
so I think that's really good advice. Yeah.
yeah.
And then my last question is what advice would you give to a young therapist just starting out? What would be your advice for them?
Let's see. Well, first, I was kind of thinking that like they had to get used to social media, and then I thought, no, they've got
They
cornered the
probably are.
market on that. But I think that they really need to be fluent with a good software program that's going to organize their notes and their billing and all the other
Hmm.
outside responsibilities so that they can free up time. Because I think that's where a
Yeah.
lot of us had to waste time with paper notes and, not.
Hmm.
Then I would suggest looking into understanding the managed care process because each insurance company does it differently. And I think it's just important to understand that. I see a lot of questions on the group boards about insurance, and some
Hmm.
people get into problems where they're not getting paid. But then the other thing, I think it's really a good idea to join a state organization. Maybe, now people are forming like local wellness groups. I see like one group I see that how we always say like, oh, I'm going to read that book about CBT, right?
Hmm.
Feeling Good by Robert Burns. But then it sits on the shelf because you're so consumed with your counseling. So
Yeah.
now I see that like they form like a book club, and then they go on Zoom
Yeah.
every week and they talk about, the chapters that they read. So I think that things that, besides just focusing on your clients and that relationship, but also more collegial.
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
and like I see, like we used to have state conferences in a ballroom at the Marriott. Now they're down to like 4 rooms in a community college.
Oh, wow.
So maybe being part of your state organization is helpful too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've found a lot of support from just Facebook groups of other clinicians. That's really made a difference in my practice and really challenged me is seeing what they're seeing and then also being challenged by their questions and their points of view and the way that they see things has actually changed quite a bit and educated me quite a bit in my field as just interacting with other clinicians on Facebook groups as well. That's been really, yeah, really helpful.
I thought that was really helpful during COVID too.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. Because you can't, yeah, like, especially if you're on your own in your own practice, if you're coming up against something, and no matter how long you've been practicing, there's something that it's good to get supervision on to get somebody or another, colleague to give their perspective on a
Yeah,
certain case. So it's really helpful
I totally agree on that.
that
And I
way.
think
Yeah.
that the national groups are interesting because regionally it seems like there are things that are
Yeah.
different. Yeah.
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 Yeah, like the culture in small town Michigan where I practice is going to be very different than I'm in a group. I think you're in the same group with a lot of California therapists, a lot of West Coast, and then you got East Coast, you got South, like
Yeah.
regions, and then let alone like local areas, and then state laws and regulations that impact your practice. I'm part of a Michigan group, and that's been really helpful for me
Yes.
navigating all the knowing what I need to do and yeah, absolutely. Because as therapists, we're trained to do therapy really well, but we're not trained to have a business. And yet a lot of therapists, I don't know about most, I haven't looked it up, but a lot of therapists do have their own business. And a lot of us are clueless because we're people. We're not numbers people.
That is so true.
And
I
so I
actually was
think that's
fortunate,
really
and
good
there was a
advice.
local local accountant that taught like a 6 weeks course on how to run a business, how to set up the
Oh,
LLC. So he kind of walked us through it. And so then a lot of
that's
people,
good.
I used to get a lot of calls from people, therapists, asking me to help. I actually, the first time I did it for somebody, it was by email, but I did it like one
Hmm.
email at a time, and once a week.
Yeah.
So then after that, like I would just send out the program and, I could help them out that way. But you're right about that. Like running a business which goes back to asking about the cancellation because
Yes.
the person that's going to cancel 30 minutes before and is going to get a $75 fee is going to be pretty angry
They're going to be
because they
upset.
don't
Yep.
understand the old adage of business is time is money.
Yeah, because it's really hard as a therapist to block out something in your schedule because other clients don't have access to that time period that they maybe really needed, especially if it's a really high desirable time slot, like before work or after work. And if someone doesn't show up, it's like, well, I got a babysitter, I'm here, and
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm staying
and you're
here.
not. So
So,
yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I owe a big debt of gratitude to a colleague of mine, and friend. She was in my wedding. She's a really great friend. But she had set up her private practice a few years before me. And so in COVID, I was like, I'm gonna do this. I don't know if I can. Can you just walk me through what it would take? And she laid out for me like every step of what I need to do and in the cheapest way possible too. That was my main goal. It was like,
yes.
how could I do this really? Because I don't know if this is going to work, and I don't have a lot of extra money right now to invest in this, but I just want to see if it's possible. So she showed me like the cheapest way to do a lot of things. And I owe a lot to her helping me out getting
Oh,
things
that's
started.
nice. See, that's the way we
But
need to do it.
yeah, yeah,
But of course, I think we are pretty good at helping each other.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but that's a
That's a
big one.
strength in our
Mhm.
field. Weakness is the business part. Strength
Yes,
is the helping each other part.
I
So
know.
hopefully it evens all out. But yeah. Well, it was great talking with you, Sheila. It's great meeting you. I
Yeah,
think my
this is
listeners
fun.
are really going to enjoy this.
Yeah,
And
I do too.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'll see you around, I
Well, I wish
guess.
you well in your practice.
Thank you so much. You
Yeah,
as well.
and reach
Yeah.
out anytime you need any help.
Oh, absolutely, I will. I love that. I will definitely take advantage of that.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.